206.
Yo, what's up, world? It's your boy Armand, and welcome to another episode of the 206. I'm joined by the co-hosts and the homies, Jason and Tim.
Hey, just want to say salutations to everybody and from the Southwest, Four Corners region of the United States, and lesser known, but out in these regions, we know it as the Navajo Nation. Some of the indigenous folks from these lands. So just want to give a big shout out and blessings to everyone tuning in into the circle here. Good to be with everyone today.
It's your boy Tim, Big Tim from Tampa, Florida. Good morning to all. Thanks for being here. I want to extend the deepest condolences to all the lives being lost every day. Please do your part in living every day in some sort of reverence for all the suffering in the world. And then would like to extend good safety and good wishes to everyone here and everyone's families. Thanks for being here.
No doubt. Amen to that. Appreciate that, Tim.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so let's get into it. Today, we're going to be talking about science, but more specifically, transgenerational epigenetic inheritance, and why it's so important to the special individual who joins us today as our guest. But first, I have something to say. Now, look, future audience, I'm going to keep it a buck. At the time of this recording, none of our episodes have been released to the public yet, nor do I really know in which order we're going to release them in when we're ready to send them out. But I had my little sister, who also happens to moonlight as our editor, listen to the first couple of episodes, and she laughed and said, "Armand, the way you introduce your guests, it ain't it. It's like super cringe." So I thought about it long and hard, and I decided, you know what, little sister, you're right. It is cringe, but I'm going to do it anyway. So, it's
I'm talking
time! Introducing, this girl is a lover of all things Baby Yoda. And speaking out of New York City, we have Yassi, the luxury of Luxembourg, Ayman. Welcome to the show.
Yeah.
Wow. Thanks for having me. It's an honor to be here, and what an introduction.
No doubt. So, you're currently a neuroscience major at Columbia University in New York City. But before we get into what that's like, as well as some of the research you're doing over there, can you kind of walk us back and tell us a little bit about yourself and maybe how you came to fall in love with science and end up at Columbia in the first place?
Yeah, definitely. So I was born in London, but raised in Luxembourg. For those of you who may not have heard of Luxembourg, I totally don't blame you. I don't think I would have known about it if I hadn't been raised there, but it's this tiny country in Europe. And it was my home for the first 18 or so years of my life. And I guess backtracking sort of to my interests and sort of the path that led me to where I am now. Even though it feels a little bit weird just because I'm 21 and like I'm sure a lot of it is still yet to come. But I'd like to think I've always had pretty interdisciplinary interests. I didn't like being pigeonholed as like a literature person or like a science person or like a math person or whatever it may be. And I do remember that when I was growing up, I loved to read and write a lot. So I guess rather than being obsessed with like science kits or being like a science whiz necessarily, I always loved reading and writing. So I'd write a lot of stories and journaled and would love to share my stories and poems with those around me. But I was also always, I mean, as much as I think as soon as I started getting consciousness of like what science actually is, I was very fascinated by science. I took the hardest science classes, all throughout my education. I was struck by scientific achievements and like the possibilities that were available to us because of science. But I definitely was very much also interested in sort of the nexus between science and the humanities. And for until I was, I guess, maybe 15, 16, I never really considered practicing science or being a scientist as a profession that was for me or was even feasible. But I distinctly remember, and it's weird that this is an anecdote because I think at the time I would have never thought this had such a huge impact on me. But I was um, fortunate enough to be traveling in Japan with my family, and we had been bouncing around in these sort of very traditional homes. We went to some monasteries and stayed with monks, and we had a very very educational trip. And on our last stop in Kyoto, we stayed with my parents' family friend who happened to be the leading molecular geneticist at Kyoto University. And I remember we were sitting in his in their apartment, and I'm Persian, by the way, side note. And they had served us Persian food, and it was really nice, just like having that sort of like familiar food, even though we obviously loved the cuisine in Japan as well. Um, but I remember he was just telling us like very vaguely about what he was doing, and that was really sort of like a light bulb moment for me. That was when I clocked that I could actually be a scientist, or that people were actually scientists and they would go to work every day and discover for a living. Like they would just, be at the frontier of a field. And that's really what it felt like for him. I think he was working on stem cells, which is a very sort of, cutting edge field at the moment. And I remember just being so fascinated by what he was doing. And I mean, it'd be interesting talking to him about what a huge impact he had on my future trajectory. But at the time, I was very enthralled by the possibility of being a scientist. And also, I mean, not to mention the fact that he was, in Japan and like, conducting science, but obviously science is being conducted everywhere. And this global endeavor for someone that I guess had been raised cultivating this global mindset was really, really attractive to me, because I love the idea of like a lot of people all over the world from a lot of different cultures and backgrounds united in this common goal and purpose to just advance a field, and hopefully obviously apply it for the betterment of society. And so that was a pretty momentous dinner to say the least. And so that was I guess 10th grade for me. And then that summer I usually spend my summers in Chicago because I have a lot of family there. My dad grew up there. And I was going to spend, again, the summer in Chicago. And I managed to get sort of, I wouldn't call it an internship, but like a research experience at Northwestern Feinberg School of Medicine. And there was this cognitive neuroscience and Alzheimer's disease center, if I'm not mistaken. There was this lab that sort of agreed to have me for a few weeks. And that was like those were sort of my firsts in all things science, in a sense, like all things sort of scientific research, if that makes sense. That was when I held my first pipette, when I walked into my first lab, when I saw my first human brain. The lab was studying was studying sort of Alzheimer's in human brains that they had obtained from autopsies. And so I observed an autopsy, my first and last autopsy. I did some cell culture. It was really fascinating. Like it was all new territory for me. And obviously, sort of it was the research was centered on studying Alzheimer's, which is one of I don't know if it's the biggest enigma, but to me, like it's such an enigmatic and devastating disease. And simultaneously, a close family friend of ours who I'd grown up seeing in Chicago had been diagnosed with Alzheimer's. And I remember it's weird. And I don't know if I'm retrospectively like projecting this parallel narrative, but like it did feel like I was, on the one hand researching this in the lab, on the other hand going home and like visiting him, and I could clearly see the cognitive decline and the sort of the results and the behavioral results, the observable results of this sort of biological degradation and decay in his brain. And so that was, I think, really impactful. And I remember talking to the professor I was working for about it, and it truly, like, I'm not even exaggerating actually when I say this, it had a very huge impact on me, because I realized that not only that was my first-hand experience with someone suffering from Alzheimer's, not to mention, I mean, there's obviously so many people who have a loved one or who have themselves suffering from it. But I think I felt on the one hand powerless because there wasn't, there's no cure, there's no really effective treatment. But on the other hand, I felt so emboldened going to lab and doing something about it. If I can't, like, even if I were to be a doctor, if I can't like prescribe something or, like give the patient something or the family something to in any way, allay their pain, or their suffering, like I might as well be working, like proactively working to find that. And I think that to me was very empowering. Like the science itself helped me empower myself, if that makes sense. So that was really, I guess, so that was within 6 months of the Kyoto experience, and this was going into my 11th grade. And that's sort of when you're kind of, thinking about what you want to do in the future, like not too seriously yet, but it's sort of where those ideas begin to, really be crystallized in a sense. And so so a lot of things are coinciding here. 11th grade was also when I took my first philosophy class. So I was very lucky that
Yeah.
my high school valued philosophy, and we actually all had to take philosophy. Ironically enough, I couldn't take the advanced philosophy class because you have to take 2 hours of philosophy, but you could also take the like advanced like 4 hour one, but that conflicted with the advanced biology class. And I remember having to pick, and I was so sad, but like I knew that for my career and my interest, the biology would be more important. And also anyway, I could have taken the 2 hour and just like supplemented it with extra reading. So I ended up just taking the 2 hour class, but it was very enriching. I had rigorous teacher, and that was when, I mean, I came with like no philosophical background really, other than just, thinking, which is a philosophical endeavor in and of itself. But I love the class. I remember we started with Descartes, we went to Locke, we went to, we did political philosophy, Kant, Hume. We studied like a lot of these influential thinkers, but also were prompting courage to think for ourselves and not necessarily like just subscribe to someone else's ideology. And so that's sort of where all these worlds came together, because I was fascinated, as I said, with science and conducting science in a lab, but I was also very interested in philosophy and how it approached the mind and subjectivity. And I knew that at the end of the day, and obviously I was basing this on our friend who had Alzheimer's, I knew at the end of the day that studying like cells in the brain or like the organic matter in the brain wasn't the full story. Like that's not who he is. Like when that organic matter decays, like he's losing part of himself, I think not inherently, but how it's expressed at least. And I knew that like science, the reductionist, materialist methods of science were not going to be sufficient to like have, a satisfactory view or a conception of the self. And so that's where my interests really got together. And sorry if this is a bit long-winded, but this gets me to why I'm at Columbia.
Not at all. Not at all.
So I was very interested in philosophy. And since I went to school, I went to school in Luxembourg, and my school really rarely sent people to the US. I mean, actually, most people would go to schools in like the Netherlands or France or Brussels. Very few. I mean, we had cohorts that would go to the UK, but like close to none would go to the US. And so but at the same time, since I'd spent a lot of time in the United States, like I was aware of like the American system. And so I remember when it came to like choosing what schools to go to me it was really between the UK, so like England and maybe Scotland, and the US. And for the most part, at least when I was applying, the programs in England really like pigeonholed you in a sense. You had to pick the course from the moment you applied. As like a 17-year-old, you had to commit to something. And so it was either neuroscience or philosophy. Like it was, or perhaps like, I don't know, maybe some schools like had some vague combination of the two, but it was kind of neither here nor there, at least in my opinion. And so I had to pick, and I knew that for career wise, like I wanted to be a scientist. And so I would have had to pick neuroscience, but that meant that I wouldn't be able to, at least like in a formal academic setting, study philosophy. And so that was something that was really disturbing to me, honestly, because I did not see myself being fully fulfilled with just studying neuroscience. And also from the program I was interested in, you didn't have much leeway. Like it was like you would do this 3-year course and that was kind of it. Whereas in this liberal arts education in the US allows you to explore so many different topics and like stretch your mind in so many different ways. And so that's why I was very attracted to American schools. And truth be told, I think I didn't like look at too many. Because I wasn't, living in the US, I didn't have like a college counselor or like anyone in Luxembourg really who like knew about these schools or knew me well enough to like guide me through it. And so I kind of myself researched schools I was interested in. And the ones that stood out were the ones that either had a really rigorous core curriculum that kind of forced students or like that, yeah, like basically forced students to take a set of interdisciplinary classes that all together. So essentially like the engineers, the historians, the engineers, the historians, the mathematicians, the biologists, they would all be taking these classes together that were ranged different fields. And so you were getting this very like holistic, comprehensive, edifying education. And so the schools that stood out to me had that sort of embedded in their pedagogy or pedagogical approach. And so Columbia was one of those. University of Chicago was another. And so I toured a few schools. Like those were the two that stood out to me the most. And I applied to both of them. I didn't do like a restrictive application for either of them. Like I wanted to keep my options open. And so I like I knew I think I was always going to apply to Columbia because of the core. It has a core curriculum that's like very rigorous. But I wasn't as obsessed with it until I visited, and my tour guide was a neuroscientist, and she was doing neuroscience research. And I mean, funnily enough, like when I got in after, we actually became good friends, and she's one of my mentors to this day. But she was doing neuroscience research. I remember sitting in this like big atrium on campus and seeing like medicine, philosophy, law, and like theology, like on all the pillars above me, and being like, wow, this is like an interdisciplinary heaven. And so I think having this amazing tour guide who's a neuroscientist doing research, and that experience, like it really felt right. Like Columbia and New York felt right, especially from like the little Luxembourg used to very sort of bubbly culture, and I wanted to get out and be on my own. I didn't have any relatives or family in New York, and that to me was like a very enticing idea. And so not that I don't love my family, but like I really wanted to have that adventure.
Get that on the record.
No, shout out to my family, but I love my family. I considered you Chicago because it was close to my family, but
No doubt.
I was really into this adventure. And so tying all these different strings together, I basically I applied to these schools, but Columbia, my heart was really, I think, the one that I most wanted to go to. And by the grace of God, I somehow was admitted. And at that point, I was so intellectually intellectually and like just, I don't know, internally so excited to be exploring these fields in a school that really, really encouraged that interdisciplinary discourse, surrounded by other students who had these interests and like wanted to talk to you about them and could offer these new perspectives. And so that's really sort of what led me to Columbia. And as soon as I got in, I started doing research and taking philosophy classes. And so I'm to this day as a senior, which is crazy. Like I'm so grateful for the experiences I've had. And I can't know if I would have been happy at another school because I've only been to one school, but I've loved my experience, and I'm very, very grateful that I was given the opportunities to explore these different interests to the fullest.
Mm-hmm.
Yo, dog, what an intro.
Wow, beautiful.
Hey, and forgive me, I forget his name, but shout out to the Japanese guy serving up that gourmet sabzi, like for real.
Yeah, no, I know. It's right. Like, it's funny because um, I've actually written about that anecdote in some applications in the past, and every time I'm like, oh wow, like if little me, like little 15-year-old me, had known that. I mean, I guess that was only 6 years ago, but anyway, if 15-year-old me had known that, like sitting there eating that Persian rice, my entire life had changed. I don't know. I think I would have like given him a tighter hug or something, but yeah, that it's true. Like in a sense, like that was a really impactful moment for me.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
Yeah, sounds like,
I'll go ahead,
I
Jason.
appreciated, all the things, kind of the flow. One of the reoccurring themes was this, this idea of confirmation, from a young age. And along the way, these signs and these doors opening or pathways leading you down the road, and seeing the interdisciplinary reality of life within that. It's like the tributaries all heading into the main streams, heading into the main river. And
Yeah.
the confirmation is there. And really, really well said. And I just want to do also a quick, just like a quick blessing prayer to all those who've lost loved ones from Alzheimer's disease. I want to say, my grandfather, William Ross, he's
I'm
thriving.
sorry.
And it's really intense illness. And if you're with people as they're going through it, it has a profound impact, I think.
Yeah.
Watching someone's mind degenerate to the point of incapacitation, and it's profound.
Yeah.
So, but on that, going back to that confirmational note, you find yourself here now. You're a senior. How do you kind of see the next steps moving forward in the things you've learned and in your experience? What are some of your kind of aspirations with all these things that you're getting exposed to?
Yeah, that's definitely something that I have to think about because I'm a senior, as you said, which is crazy to think about as I sit in my first apartment in New York. I've been in student housing, and it feels like a milestone to be, have my first apartment as a senior. And I'm here because I'm working. I work in a lab, and it just made most sense for me to come here because I can't really do my research remotely, and so currently, it's a week before school starting, or no, just kidding. It's 5 days, or 4 days before my first day of senior year. And I think so from a career perspective, I want to spend the next year or next 2 years very much refining my interests in terms of, because I'm very much of I love, like, I'm very interested by a lot of different things, and a lot of different subjects compel me, and I think I can, I could passionately research a lot of different subjects at this stage, but in academia, you do at least initially have to focus and double down and on, like, a topic, and really commit to it and anchor yourself before you can, I think, like, spread yourself around a bit. And so I want to really refine my interests, and I decided to, sort of on that note, to apply, I think, defer applying to grad school programs for a year at least, to sort of think about what I'm interested in and get different research experiences before I commit to a longer program, because
Mm-hmm.
PhD programs can, last anything from like 3 to 7, 8 years. And so, sort of in the short term now, like to answer your question, I guess I'm focusing on the short term. In the short term, I want to refine my interests, obviously get as much of a rigorous research experience to prepare myself for graduate school. And so I'm working in my lab. I'm going to be diligently, giving my all to the studies studies and my research, and hopefully just preparing myself for graduate school, because I'm really excited. I wanted to actually apply this year, but because of the pandemic and like everything, I'm not in a rush, and I really want to like have, different research experiences before I commit myself, as I said. And so I'm planning actually on next year doing a year, either like doing a different sort of project in my current lab, which I love, or trying something new, still within neuroscience, but trying something new but complementary to what I'm doing now. And so that's sort of the short term. Long term, I want to lead I say this now, obviously things can change. You never know where life takes you. And I think the pandemic definitely has shown us that life is full of surprises, and everything can be toppled from one day to the next. But from where I stand now, I really want to lead a career in science. And what that exactly means, I'm not, precisely sure, but I know I want to spend some time in academia just because I love teaching so much. I love mentorship and teaching. And obviously, along with doing the scientific research, the component of academia that involves teaching the next generation, mentoring graduate students, mentoring other scientists is really appealing to me, as well as being part of this scientific community, being part of this global community, as I mentioned earlier, that is sort of in their different ways working towards pushing a frontier and discovering things that will like help society. And I think so exactly, so that's something that I'm really interested in. And I hope to always also remain intimately connected to society. So not just, like isolating myself in a lab or being in that academic echo chamber, but always intimately in tune with the needs of society, with the different inequities that exist in science, that exist in who is a beneficiary of scientific research, with policies that can sort of draw on my research. Again, I don't know exactly what I'm going to be studying, but like, for example, what I study now, which we'll get to, but very broadly, is sort of how our environments help us or influence how we navigate the world, and may influence how our descendants navigate the world. That whole topic that I'm sure we'll get onto later in this podcast, I think has major implications on policy and education. Like, how are we creating healthy and enriching environments for individuals to thrive in? And also on a physical level, how is air pollution and stressors and all these different factors, how are they impacting our our nervous system, and how we behave, our behavior, and our susceptibilities to disease and psychopathology. And so I really, really hope, and I think I will be, because it's something I'm passionate about, but I hope to be intimately connected to how science can be translated to better and advance society, and really, really address those needs. And so, yeah, I guess that's maybe more vague than you expected, but that's kind of like the long-term and short-term goals.
Yeah. Oh, good. That's great. Keeping an open mind really is one of the necessary and wonderful things of being a scientist, isn't it? And as you said, this time currently having us take a little step back, be patient. I think that's happening for a lot of people during this time. So yeah, what can we learn with a little bit more stillness, a little more presence? And
Yeah,
yes, I wish you
exactly.
the best though. In any case, so no worries.
Thank you. No, yeah, and I think what you said about patience is key, because one of my mentors once said that you can't like base your life purpose or life meaning on science, because science doesn't on science in a sense, because nature, which is like, I guess, what science is studying in a sense, doesn't care about you. Like, nature is just doing its own thing, and it will give you the results that your experiments prompt, in a sense. Your experiments are like
Designed to find.
designed to assess or capture in any way. but it doesn't, like, nature isn't like bending to your needs. Like, you have a hypothesis or you have, something you want to study, like that should be detached from the outcome. And so you have to just be okay with, like, very with a, humble posture of learning, be investigating and fearlessly questioning nature. But then you can't, like, you can't, be too attached to the outcome. And because at the end of the day, in her words, nature doesn't care about you. And so I think that is another thing. So I'm kind of, I just want to always, obviously I have full control over the questions I ask and the ways in which I approach science, and the decisions I make and the paths I take. Did not mean for that to rhyme, but that sounds kind of weird, but cool. But anyway,
Yeah, cool.
yeah,
Good look.
yeah, exactly. So it's about being patient, detached, and humble in a sense. That's really what it boils down to for me.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I have a billion different questions going through my mind, a lot of which also pertain to the current research you're doing. But before we delve into that, I'll ask some of the other questions that don't pertain to that. So you mentioned how you really like interdisciplinary studies and how you're very big on philosophy.
Mm-hmm.
So my next question is in regard to that. And it's, do you take the same cognitive approach to both disciplines, or do you like approach philosophy scientifically or approach your study of neuroscience philosophically, or am I just creating a false notion?
No, that's really interesting. I like that. I think maybe my teachers or people reading or, like, sort of experiencing me in both those fields would have a different response, because I think that they both impact me more deeply than I think sometimes. But I would say that I definitely strive for coherence, and I don't want to, like, segment those two aspects of who I am. So it's not like I'm in my, like, history or philosophy class, and I go to lab and I completely dissociate those two, because I really can't. Like, I'll be, they will necessarily blend into each other. But I think in philosophy I kind of let my mind, um I was gonna say I let my mind wander more, but I don't actually know if that's necessarily only in philosophy. I think, yeah, I'm gonna actually change my initial response, because now that I think about it, I think I approached both of them in more of a similar way than I initially thought. Because I think in general, I'm constantly, like, questioning the world around me and critically thinking about it, and, like, asking a lot of questions. I generally just ask a lot of questions. And I think
Same.
that applies to both. Like, I'm thinking about myself in a philosophy class and thinking about myself in a lab. Like, I'm buzzing with questions. And so in that way, I apply the same method, I guess, or cognitive approach, as you say. And I think also, like, when it comes to my writing, like, for example, I took a neuroscience seminar, but I've also taken, like, philosophy seminars. I think they do also blend into each other. Like, I think sometimes in my science writing, I can be a bit too philosophical, and, in some contexts that's not as appropriate or, like, as, useful. But it's just, like, I guess, who I am. It's just my mind, like, spitting things out on the page. But then in science, and I think actually this is more fruitful, because in science, sometimes, a lot of the times, the questions I ask are motivated by philosophy and are motivated by my faith, which we can talk about later. But if the podcast takes us there. But I think in that sense, like, a lot of the questions and the intuitions I have do stem from, like, philosophy and religion. And so they do actually, I do think, in my mind at least, I guess all of us, like, even if we have disparate interests, like, they must somehow cohere in our minds to make, like, a self. And so I think in that sense also, when I'm doing things, they do also, like, interact with each other in different ways, like in the questions and my writing and my speech and the topics I'm interested in. Like, for example, I'm interested in philosophy of mind specifically, and that obviously is connected to neuroscience, because neuroscience, in a biological way, studies the mind, or what the brain, or whatever wishes to refer to that thing that does the thinking, and in a sense makes you, who you are. And so, yeah, that's my short answer, or maybe long answer to your question.
Yeah, I have a few more, but I'm going to keep it to one because we haven't heard from Big Tim in a bit, or at all, really. So that one question, I have a more nuanced version of the question I just asked, but since you kind of answered it already, I'll go into another one. And it sounds, just listening to your whole, inspiration behind why you became in love with science and why you currently are studying it. You talked about your purpose a bit as well. And it all sounds very empowering. So I'm thinking, your sense of agency when it comes to science, is it more in what you may be able to apply with it in the future, like its application as far as how you can help serve humanity, as you mentioned before? Or is it more in the discovery of reality? Like maybe, or is that, again, am I asking also like a false dichotomy? In your discovering of reality, are you then able to then apply it to the world? So which one, I guess, gives you more of a sense of agency, or are they like both interconnected and that's where you get your sense of agency from?
You cut out briefly for me, so just to reiterate your question, is your question which one, like philosophy or science, gives more of a sense of agency?
No, not philosophy. So sorry, let me be more clear. I was saying the sense of
Oh,
empowerment,
sorry, it
specifically
cut
when it
out.
comes
Sorry.
to your yeah. Yeah, no worries, no worries. When
hmm
it comes to science, you talked about,
hmm
um, for me, when you think about science, obviously science, a lot of it is research, right? So you have research, which is then a community of scientists, or a scientist as an individual coming upon discoveries, right? One day you might find the cure for Alzheimer's. Oh, so I'm asking, is your sense of agency and the sense of empowerment that you feel, is it because you're like a discoverer of reality, or is it in its application? Like, because you find the cure for Alzheimer's, you can then apply it and
Mm.
obviously give it as a gift to the world.
Oh, interesting. I think both. I'd like to think that, and I think maybe, I mean, this might be a bit cliche, but I'd like to think that I mean, no, I do strongly believe that I want to do something that will benefit like mankind in some way. Hopefully in an impactful, lasting way. And I I believe that in terms of my skills and interests currently and my capacities as an individual, science to me right now is how I can best do that for my, like, on a personal level. And I think that, um yeah, I would just answer with both. I think that the um the idea of being in a lab, I mean, it's not just an idea, the situation and like the privilege of like being able to go into a lab and sit there, as I often do with my postdoc or whoever I'm working with, and brainstorm. Like we have like huge windows, glass walls, sort of uh, lining the perimeter of the lab, and so we can always like write on the walls with like markers, and so we always brainstorm together, and we're constantly thinking and brainstorming and asking questions and reading the literature, and then like following up, asking follow-up questions. And that is very empowering, because it's and then after asking those questions, then we design experiments to answer them in some way, or try to answer them. As I said, like, you don't really have control over the outcome, but you have control over like, what questions you're asking, right? And so that whole pipeline, or that whole like sequence of activities, like asking the questions, designing the experiments, conducting the experiments, analyzing the results, that in and of itself is very empowering, because it's like I can scrutinize and fearlessly question the world around me, and I have the tools. And I think everyone has these tools. I think everyone is a scientist at heart, and in terms of like in terms of thinking and like looking at investigating the world around you. But that toolkit, I think, is very um, empowering, because it feels kind of, you feel very powerful being able to do something in a sense that no one, or that others haven't been able to do before, or that isn't known, and like you're producing knowledge in a sense that hopefully will be of use. So that's really great. And then to the be of use part, so the second element of your question, I think that it just goes back down to my purpose and what I want to do with the science, and being able to and being intimately connected with the translation of like what's done in the lab, even if it's like basic science research, to the betterment of society. And that interface in and of itself is also very empowering, because you're using these very sort of human characteristics of questioning the world around you to then potentially like changing lives for the better, or allowing individuals to empower themselves through science is also beautiful. I've been very involved in a lot of mentorship programs. One of them was these remote Skype calls and science workshops with middle school students in Tanzania and Rwanda. And we would have these weekly science workshops where we would basically work with the students to empower they would empower themselves through science. We wouldn't be empowering them. We would just be there, facilitating the workshops. Like we would basically for half of the year, we would be going through different science concepts and focusing on how they can be applied to their reality. But then for the other half of the year, we came up with a science project together. It's mainly them, actually. I don't want to take any credit for that. But we would then come up with a science project, and remotely, which is also beautiful, the power of this remote interaction. Remotely, we would they would come up with a science project and actually build it and then present it to their schools. And they felt so powerful after that. Just that whole process of thinking of learning about the science, thinking about how it applies to society, and then how they can build something or discover something that can actually bring that into fruition. So a lot of these experiences like that and other mentorship programs that I've organized and led and participated in have also really reinforced this notion. So I'm very grateful to have found something that I feel this passionately about.
No, that's beautiful. Yo, Mr. Zero Dark 30 over there, you want to join us in today's podcast? I know.
Sure. Thanks for passing the ball. I just want to say I appreciate everyone's
I'm Kobe.
questions.
I don't pass, bro.
Yeah. I just want to say that probably what touched my heart the most. I don't say I'm proud of you. You still got a long way to go. I didn't realize how young you were. I appreciate the love and support you've had throughout your academic development. I like where your mind's at. One of the things that stood out for me was, and you probably used the word intimacy 2 or 3 times, that you want to keep an intimate connection with society as you do your research and develop and go through your academic journey, which is very important in this day and age where, so much apathy, misinformation, and disenfranchisement is like the normal. I remember going through school and, I was always a teacher's pet. If you'd see me through high school, you'd be seeing me with my teachers during lunch or any given time of the hour, trying to strike it up and socialize with my teachers. And my science department was the closest group of teachers that I was closest with throughout my high school years. I was in a science newsletter. They came together and bought me a telescope. I had a biology teacher who gave me African American heritage books. I had an astronomy teacher who tried to get me in Arizona State. We talk every day, look up the latest space news, ask me how I'm doing in my personal life. And I grew up in the age of Bill Nye, of Carl Sagan. These are powerful influences in these academic fields of science that did a powerful job at connecting with the rest of society whose, academics may or may not play a large role or an extended role in their everyday lives. Yeah. So it's very good that I hear you saying that you love to teach, that you love your mentorship,
Yeah.
that you want to remain intimate with the rest of society, not exactly, a researcher who's stuck in the lab day in and day out, because society needs that. Without science, none of us would be here. So it's very
Yeah.
important that when people can, as they expand their knowledge and find themselves in different positions in society, that they recognize that and develop their own unique way of connecting with the rest of the world, hopefully through encouragement, inspiration, and love, just like many people throughout the ages have tried to do. So
Exactly. No,
that's
I think.
very
Oh,
important.
sorry.
No, go ahead, my lady. No, that's all I wanted to say. I wanted to highlight those specific points you've made about staying intimate with society and your love of mentoring and teaching.
Yeah, no, I just wanted to build on something you said because I definitely wanted to also give a shout out to all those authors and scientists around the world to have also made it one of their life's purposes. I mean, I don't know what their purposes are, maybe, but like have made it one of their missions to also share their knowledge in a very accessible way. Like along with Sagan, like another one for me was Brian Greene, who I had the honor of taking a class with this year. He's a leading physicist, and he also writes books, mainly physics. I was very also interested in physics. I think in an alternate universe, I would have been a physicist because like how cool is space, you know? But one of his books, The Fabric of the Cosmos, The Elegant Universe, like he also wrote sort of these books that make science accessible to a wider audience, and obviously there's a lot of neuroscience examples as well. And I mean, I hope that like it'd be awesome if I could write a book or two in the future to do that too, because I think even though science is really really cool, I think it's one of those things that's best. It's really best when shared. Like it's there's there's no use of like toiling away in a lab if other people can't enjoy it and be in awe and benefit and be like, receive the benefits of it. And so I think that's really important. But also just like a disclaimer, I think even though science is awesome, I'm obviously obsessed with science and I want to dedicate my life to it. I do think that science shouldn't necessarily be like the authority, or we shouldn't necessarily like, I mean, we can't like guide our like the society through science because science isn't prescriptive, or at least mostly isn't prescriptive. It's descriptive. It's descriptive. And I think other fields and professions and knowledge systems and disciplines offer a lot of enriching insights, indispensable insights about the nature of society, the nature of reality. And obviously, I'm interested in philosophy, so I strongly believe this. And science is just one toolkit, a very powerful toolkit, but just one toolkit. And so, yeah, I just wanted to make that disclaimer as well, because it's something I strongly believe in.
No doubt. So kind of, I know we talked about it previously that we're going to jump into your research a bit. So let's take a deep dive into that. So you're a neuroscience major at Columbia, and currently your research is in regard to transgenerational epigenetic inheritance. So you've explained to me what it is in the past, so I feel like I have a relatively rudimentary grasp on it. But explain to our audience. We don't know what that is. Everyone here is ignorant. Can you give us a basic understanding of what it is you research?
Yeah. So just starting off with the transgenerational epigenetic inheritance term, it's a pretty new and emerging field in some ways, even though I think it's pretty intuitive, and scientists, even I believe Darwin himself, ironically gestured to it in the past. But it's basically this idea that the environment. So epigenetics is the study of how our environments and so how various sort of molecules can that result from the environment or result from both your internal and external environment can in some way influence your gene expression. So not necessarily your genome, which is like your DNA that you inherit from your parents, but how it's expressed. And that's really what's important, right? I mean, you have these sequences in your DNA, but what's important is like what's expressed, what's observable, you know? And so epigenetics is sort of the study of that, or is the study of that. And transgenerational epigenetics is how these environmental markers can be transmitted from one generation to the next. And so epigenetics as a field is a pretty well established and accepted field. I mean, it's how our cells specialize. It's how we, in a sense, change. It's really at the core of this dialectic between the learned and the innate. How we inherit things, but how we then learn and our phenotypes, which is sort of what's expressed from our genome, change based on our environments and what we learn from our environments. But what is more contentious is this idea that these epigenetic markers can be transmitted to successive generations, and that's the transgenerational component. And then the inheritance component in this transgenerational epigenetic inheritance is where you are essentially inheriting in some shape or form the remnants of your ancestors' internal and external environments. And I think this is, I mean, again, I think we have a long way to go until we fully grasp like what everything I just said means, and until I fully grasp what everything I just said means. But it's really this idea that it's pretty intuitive, right? Like if your ancestors went through a traumatic period or famine or whatever it may be, it makes sense, and to me at least, that there would be a remnant. And often, obviously, there's a cultural remnant, there's an ecological remnant. There's the societal remnant. Like that's something I think that most people would accept. But the fact that there's a genetic, biological, molecular remnant is pretty groundbreaking, honestly. And that's the topic is really getting at. And and that's what I study. And many different labs around the world are approaching in different ways with different model organisms. Obviously, it's very difficult to study it in humans, even though there have been studies that have looked at it in humans. But as you can imagine, you can't exactly condition humans and then take out their brains and analyze them. It's mainly in cases of descendants of groups that have been historically undergone really intense periods such as the Holocaust, and looking at the Dutch hunger winter, for example, and looking at their descendants and their epigenetic or their epigenome. And so that's sort of the extent of it in humans as of now. But in C. elegans, which are these very simple model organisms, and mice, which are like the main mammal that is used to study this topic, and also in flies in some shape or form, this is being more looked at sort of in a granular and zoomed in rigorously genetic and neurological way. And so my lab is a huge lab, and it does many different scientists do a lot of different things. But my specific project with my postdoc in my lab applies or seeks to understand transgenerational epigenetic inheritance of learned fear in mice. And so that's sort of our approach to this huge, far and wide-reaching topic. Yeah, I don't know if you want me to sort of expand on any of these points.
No, I have a few questions myself, but I want to defer to Jason or Tim.
I have a question here briefly, which it's going to be personal, I guess. I'm going to ask it to the group, so we can all just share if we're interested. But when we talk about historical memory being transferred biologically, and how it influences perceptions, how we move through the world, etc. I'm wondering for ourselves, kind of like in our own ancestry, have we looked back? Have we learned some of the dynamics that have played a part on our biological makeup and how we move through the world. So I'm just curious to the group here in the circle, if looking at that, and if we have, what did we learn? And did we make particular choices, make different choices after that learning? And I have some personal stories with it, but I'm curious about everyone here.
Repeat your question one more time. So if I answer, I make sure I'm answering the right question and not
So
my
the idea
perception of your
being,
question.
cheers, yeah. Just the idea being that thinking about epigenetic impact and where we come from, have we explored where we come from? And if so, in our learning, did it influence us to make different choices about where we were going? Because, if we're talking, say, about food, or in resistances to certain kinds of food, or susceptibility to certain, sort of mal impact on the body through certain foods, like somewhere there's a chain of events, there's a historical sort of database we might check into. And so I'm just wondering, like that, like, have we looked at that? And if so, what kind of changes were came about due to that learning? So just kind of like personal reflection question and growth question, right? I'm kind of asking that. And maybe we don't want to share this, or maybe we don't have any particular things coming to mind. So no, we can be, wherever you're at with it, we can move on from it too.
No doubt. I can answer in a way, I guess. And my understanding of this is still in its nascent stages of development. I mean, I've had conversations with Yasi about this before, both in real life and, and, and it's like, I feel like at times I feel like I intuitively understand it, but then in my way that I try to apply it to my own life and into like society as a whole, I feel like I'm not sure if when I'm doing it correctly, if it's just my own fancy in my head. But I'll just say this when it comes to things being passed down. So I don't really have a relationship with my father at all. I never met him in real life. I've had a few conversations with him. Like, I think I had my first conversation with him when I was 20. It was right before I moved to Israel to do my year of service. And I was 20, and it was actually on Christmas. And that's the first time I talked to him. So I don't know too much about him, but it's funny because when I was living in California and I was running track, I happened to call him one time, or he called me. I don't even remember. And we were talking, and I found out that that he was like a hurdler. He was a sprinter too, a sprinter and a jumper. And I can jump really high, and I'm pretty fast. And it was when I was running, it just felt very natural, and I liked it. And I can go into my own story about what you can learn through physical exercise and the exploration of yourself, and the exploration what you can learn through the exploration of physical endeavors, what you can learn about yourself and apply it to life. That's a whole different conversation. But I just felt like it was very natural, I guess you can say. It just seemed like it was inherent. Like, and running to me always just felt inherent. Jumping to me also just always felt inherent. And I don't know, I would have to ask my dad to see if he had any runners or jumpers in his family. But it's almost like, will my son or daughter automatically just feel at ease when they run? Is it because, like, it's, again, passed down in the genome somehow, this affinity for running? Is it, because if I run and my dad ran, maybe our bodies shape themselves a certain way, and then when we pass down our genetics, their bodies are in a way that makes them feel more comfortable running? I don't know. That was just the first thing that came to mind, just simply because it's something that, like, again, I didn't really know. It wasn't like, oh yeah, I'm going to run track because I know my dad ran track, right? It was more just like, I've always felt like I wanted to run track. And when I was little, I had severe asthma when I was young, and I could play other sports, but I played basketball, I played football, I played baseball. But for some reason, track, when it was just like the sprinting, like, it would affect my asthma more, so I had to stop when I was 11. But I always like kind of wanted to do it, so I went back when I was in school, in college, and I just started running track, because again, it was always calling to me for some reason. So is that evidence of some inheritance it's passed down through the generations? Maybe. Is it just hey, I always just kind of liked it because it looked cool, and because I knew I was fast? Maybe. Who's to say? But that's the first thing that came to my mind.
Yeah, nice. Thanks for sharing.
True that.
What about yourself? You said you had some stories.
Yeah, well, again, just in a similar, taking that humble posture of learning, continuing to, be open about ideas and um, changes, right? That things can change and our perceptions can change. And what we think and hold to be true in one season might stand to look a little different in another season. So, with that being said, however, for me, my ancestry is mostly Irish and English. So, when I think about kind of where we come from, um, the heritage that my ancestors walked for probably centuries, in certain parts of the world that I wasn't from. So I never had like a strong connection with that, this idea of like who are my deeper rooted ancestors, and how do some of those things influence me. So it would be interesting, of course, to see like how far back that genetic influence is. I hear in some cases it might be quite short. In 1 or 2 generations, major shifts are happening in the genome. I don't know the scientific terms, so and I could be mistaken on a lot of this. But going back to that thought on my personal experience was when I moved out here to the Southwest, the Navajo Nation, and the Navajo people call themselves Dene. Dene is the self-identified tribe, so that would be the more accurate thing to say. So the Dene people, they have a very strong teaching with the sort of natural sciences, very much into herbal medicines and other healings from, say water, and whether that's hot water in natural hot springs or it's cold water, that there's certain ways you can heal the body through these methods. In any case, so since I'm being out here, I'm learning about this from the community here, those who I've made friendships with, and they've kind of walked with me and taught me really many of the beautiful teachings, and where they come from. And they always are saying, this is how we've been. This is always where we're from. And if you ask a Dene person, they'll tell you the creation started right here between these 4 sacred mountains, which the Navajo Nation sits between these 4 sacred mountains. And it's in the history as far back as you could talk to anybody in the sort of those who identify as Dene and know the history. So I'm saying all that to say that it's very much rooted in know where you come from, know the land you come from, definitely know your history and what your mother did, your grandmother, great grandmother, have an awareness. And a lot of those generational teachings were passed down orally. So I'm saying all this to highlight a little bit of the beauty of this community out here. It's a community I fell in love with, and I want to do that because it's oftentimes forgotten. And I'm here with a Dene brother. I'm hanging with him right now, and we were having a visit with someone who said their first time out to this part of the area, they'd never seen an indigenous person. And they were born and raised in California. They came out here and they were shocked. They said they went into a sort of state of fear because their history books and their education suggested that these kind of communities didn't exist anymore. So when he approached, he realized his whole upbringing and his education wasn't complete, to say the least, if not outright fallacious, because he was saying that in his history books, he was told that Native peoples didn't exist like this. So my point is to say there's a lot of tribal communities in this nation, and many of us maybe know this already, but over 500 recognized tribal groups, and the Dene or the Navajo Nation is one of the largest. So I'm just kind of predicating that a little bit. So there's much we can learn about the people of this land, and they have great teachings, much like we're sharing here with Yasi about modern laboratory investigational sciences that will lead us toward all kinds of advancement, and then also philosophical consciousness and expansion through that. How do these things come together in certain ways, and how do they also remain sort of independent in other ways? And then also I'm thinking about just this sort of the sort of ancestral teachings that have existed for so many countless generations and are quite universal when you look at the holistic or at the world at large. You can see that many of the sort of ancestral teachings, no matter what part of the globe you're in, there's a lot of familiarity or similarity and diversity, of course, which is quite beautiful to acknowledge and celebrate. So I say that too, to then say one of the teachings, full circle here, Armand, something simple, and I appreciate y'all letting me go on this tangent, but now I'm here, and one of my friends, she's telling me about some of the cultural reality, and just like we're sharing, know your history. And she asked me if I knew my history, and I didn't. And it was quite impactful question because I didn't really recognize it in a previously in my life, about how me knowing where I came from in a more profound way could really open my eyes to who I am in a certain capacity, right? And there's other things we could talk about with this too. So I just wanted to say it really put me on a path toward investigation and a little bit more about my ancestral background. So that's why when I say I'm Irish and English, it came more or less in these past, handful of years that I've been exploring that. And in so doing, I came across certain things around essentially herbalism and how the Celtic community used herbs. And so I was exploring some of those things and seeing how I might apply them to my own life for the healing of my body in particular. And then also just by way of other things we're saying, when we say philosophy, I've learned a lot about Celtic philosophy and seership and various other historical, literature that I didn't know existed, and I'm learning about some of that this way. And then how do I apply it is, a lot of different kinds of uses that I'll apply it. So in the philosophical way, there was an approach towards, say, prayer that was had its particular ceremony itself. So for me, it's kind of like I try to incorporate some of those Celtic ceremonies into my modern prayer, for example, and it just resonates with me. So I can't speak to some particular why would this be important to quantify or anything like that, but on a very personal level, it's meaningful, and I feel like I can reflect and sense the people who came before me, the people whose shoulders I stand on, and then also how they move through the world. I feel like that's not a conversation that's lost. It exists in our DNA, and going back and coupling that with research and coupling that with asking questions and remaining open, just as open, it has kind of offered a new lens by way of how I try to move through the world now and how I try to engage with people in the present, knowing that everyone is coming from a history, very deep history, and why it might look the way it looks. And it deserves investigation. Every human, every heart, every mind deserves to be investigated and not to be, outright put a stamp on, well, this leads to this. And if you're like that, it means the other thing, rather than that, but rather let's be with people. Let's actually take people in, give them time, and be curious about people. And there's a lot of wonderful things. So those were a few thoughts, and I appreciate y'all letting me kind of do it in a lengthy way.
No, thank you so much. I hope, can you guys hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you, homegirl.
Yeah. Okay. You can hear me?
We can.
You can. Okay, sorry. Yeah, no, thank you so much for your thoughts. There's two things that I wanted to build on just briefly. Like, you spoke briefly about this power of education, and like knowing the history and how important that is. And I think that's sort of where the study of transgenerational epigenetic inheritance and education and policy really go hand in hand, because it's so important that we create these environments for individuals, and that's done through education, that's done through having this awareness and respect for everyone's heritage, and that's all part of this enriching environment. And it's important to know that we're all organic with the world around us. And so even if it might not be like for example, the effects and consequences of trauma might not be as potent in descendants as they were in the individual that directly experienced the trauma. but even if it's not as intense, there's still going to be remnants in some shape or form, whether it's through susceptibilities or tendencies or sensitivity. And so it's continuously very important to foster these important environments, and one space for that is through education. And then another thing you said at the end was this narrative of, or that you sort of alluded to, with this narrative of doom versus what I like to call this like narrative of healing. In a sense, I think this idea of a biological imprint and marker for our environmental exposures can perhaps be a little bit I don't know, like tragic, or very like doomed in a sense, because you think that your like the experiences your ancestors have in some way shaped and dictated how you're going to lead your life, and that can be very limiting. It can feel, I mean, I can't
Yeah,
imagine how
exactly.
limiting it must feel, but like it must feel very limiting and debilitating in some ways. But I think that the power of this research is very much in changing that narrative of doom to a narrative of healing. So even though you acknowledge that perhaps because of the atrocities that have happened historically, there certain individuals may be predisposed to some things, it doesn't mean that those predispositions are necessarily going to manifest like that.
Exactly.
This whole epigenetic cycle can start again. I mean, they can through these enriching environments, or through these societal changes, those like our gene expression be altered and impacted in new ways. And so it's not that these are all like set in stone characteristics. It's just, I think it's the power is in acknowledging that they exist, that there are these remnants, and we need to be more mindful of the environments we cultivate for individuals,
Exactly.
and the communities we build, and the way we treat each other, really. I mean, I think that's the best way to put it. And then moving towards how can we heal, how can we together heal, how can we learn about the world around us. That's what I meant with intimately connected. Like, I constantly want to learn about and just listen to how this research can impact or is relevant to different realities that I don't know, which I think is the best I can do, like just listen and learn. And so yeah, I definitely like the one of the last points you made definitely struck a chord, like moving from this narrative of doom to a narrative of healing. And personally, I think one of the directions I wish to go with research is through resilience, like studying how resilience is fostered, both, I mean, in an individual's lifetime, but also at the time scale of multiple generations. Like, how can we build these resilient characteristics? I think everyone can benefit from resilient characteristics, because as we saw with the pandemic, we never know what can hit us, and we never know what hardship we will have to face. And so resilience is something that is absolutely necessary. And that sort of ties into this narrative of healing.
Tim, it sounded like you had a question, because I'm just being cognizant of the time as well. But I had one more question to ask her, but it sounded like you wanted to say something, so I'll go ahead and let you go if you did.
Well, go ahead, Kobe. Shoot away.
No doubt. So, okay, so I want to make sure I'm asking this question right, because I'm sure that while most people might not have heard of transgenerational epigenetic inheritance before, I think one term that many people may be more familiar with is generational trauma. So,
Exactly.
and oftentimes when people hear generational trauma, they think of some of the world's worst atrocities, such as chattel slavery in regards to Africans, the Holocaust in regard to the Jewish community. So let me use those two things as an example for my question. So when thinking about those trauma, obviously, the assumption is that those things have an effect on the generations that came after, the generations that were subject to those atrocities. So I guess my simple question is, if you were to take someone who's a direct descendant of someone who went through the Holocaust, you were to take someone who is of West African lineage, and you were to open up and dissect their brain, are you going to see evidence of that? Are you going to see some marker, some little genome raving fact, like, hey, Yasi, look at me, here's your evidence? Or is it only that, like, once certain environmental stimuli are introduced into their environment, you would then see manifest changes on the cellular level?
That's a really interesting question, an important question. I don't at all think I can give you the answer. I actually don't even think that anyone at this stage can give you like a full answer. But I would say that the issue or the difficulty, as I was alluding to earlier, about studying this field in humans is that there's so many confounding variables. Like if you look at, for example, chattel slavery and the hundreds of years that that individuals, underwent like the most atrocious circumstances. Like obviously, I mean, at least like sorry, like maybe it's not obvious because we haven't proven it scientifically, but I would think that
No,
it's
it's
very
obvious.
intuitive
It's obvious.
yeah, like it's very intuitive and obvious to me at least that will have a remnant. Like yes, obviously we see the societal impacts, we see the cultural impacts, but I believe that there has to be, if it's hundreds of years. I mean, I already said earlier that this has been studied by a scientist at in actually New York, looking at the descendants of Holocaust survivors. But slavery was hundreds of years, like, and still these forces are still ongoing today. So I mean, it makes sense. It only makes sense that there would be some biological remnant. I think that to me is at least clear on an intuitive level. But in terms of the scientific
Hello?
evidence, I
Did she
don't.
cut out for you guys?
Yeah.
Did I?
Yo, Yasi.
She'll come back. She'll come back.
Oh wait, is she back? Yasi. I saw her click her mute button. Yasi, what happened? I'm just gonna kick her then. Hey, you back?
What the heck happened?
I have no idea. And Yasi, I'm so sorry, but I'm pretty sure based off my research I did about the website, we should be good to go. No, we should be good to go. No, you're good. You're good.
She's so juicy.
No, Yasi's like, I was doing so good.
Wait, I never. What?
No.
What's the probability?
I mean, we're gonna find out in a little bit as soon as we end.
Wait,
I think it's low. I think it's low. Based off everything that's happened on the website before, I think it's pretty low. I made like a calculated risk.
Yeah, I think it's gonna be fine.
I think it's good based off everything I know, and that's why I chose this website to use the recording, because I read a bunch of stuff about this, and I think we're Gucci.
Oh my god.
I guess.
Okay. Well, hi guys.
Organic.
Audience.
Yasi's back.
But I was just saying, to wrap up my point, I was just saying that like for like a traumatic period that has lasted centuries, it's just like I think it's very intuitive and obvious that it has remnants and that it would if like smaller periods of trauma and stress have been shown to. But I think that, and not to obviously downplay the Dutch hunger winter or the Holocaust, but just in terms of like the length of a lot of these periods. But I think that but at the same time, it's very difficult to study just because there's so many confounding variables in humans. So like if you were to take an individual today with your example, like we still live in a very in like a racist society, and there's so many confounding variables. There's so many stressors and like different factors that would be still influencing the results you find when you crack open that brain as you described. And so it's difficult to isolate the variables, which is where model organisms come in, and where it's easier in at this stage to study in like mice, even though obviously their experiences are going to be very very different,
Of course,
to say the
of course.
least. So but you can in that sense like isolate different variables and like control for different variables, and very much like also like very much minimize the confounding variables. Because for example, you can, if you expose like a male mouse to some sort of trauma, if you induce some sort of trauma or fear, you can, and then you mate them with a female mouse, you can then, I mean, as terrible in some ways as this sounds, you can then, for example, remove the male so the male never actually meets the its offspring, and then the offspring are then raised in a very controlled environment. So you're really just zeroing in on the biological markers, if that makes sense. Like this is just like a hypothetical experiment, but that's, I think, where it's difficult to study it in humans.
To me, it may not be, obviously it's not conspicuous because we're not talking about physical things. So you may be able to easily see like, oh yeah, these phenotypes, certain phenotypes or certain genetic markers that are obvious, and perceptible to the eye. It's very clear like, oh, you look like your father. Oh, you look like your grandmother. Oh, you look like your cousin. Like you can see that. So although it may not be like physically, and because again, we can't look into people's cells. So even though it's not observable in that sense, it's very to me it's axiomatic, like it's self-evident. And just like we can see again, people's ideologies get passed down through generations. Again, DNA structures get passed down through generations. It's like everything gets to be passed down but this, and there's like no evidence of it whatsoever. To me, if it exists, there's going to be evidence of it somewhere. So again, I may not be able to give you the a doctoral dissertation explaining it, but to me it is
Neither can
intuitive.
I.
It is intuitive and
Yeah.
axiomatic, and I think that it does exist. But as we again continue to consult as a scientific community and do the research, we'll come to discover the reality soon enough.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. And there's a power of human intuition too. And like, as I said, science is very powerful and is a statement. Like the scientific findings are a statement in of themselves, and even in a political sense. But there's also the power, like this axiomatic, as you were saying, of intuition and the human intellect, which I think is very, very important to also consider.
Oh, and one final thing I want to say on the subject, as you guys are talking about, you were talking about resilience, and we were talking about, instead of the doom and gloom, thinking about healing. But okay, so once you get healing, of a past trauma, let's say that there is nothing to heal. There's no atrocity committed to a population, and therefore there's nothing passed down that's negative. But what if we start building a better society and we can pass down the opposite? Can we pass down like generational love, generational affection, like these ideas, these philosophies, these modes of behavior, things that are born of our heart and our spirit, are those capable of being passed down? Because then you're talking about a true way to honestly have a global society, because this is what's going to be necessary. So I think that, that will be the next step in our evolution. Is like once we get done healing all this stuff, we build a world and society where we can pass down the opposite effect. And it's only a way that's going to ensure that we can stay united into the future.
Exactly. Yeah, I firmly believe that too.
No doubt. Well, I know that we lost a little bit of time there, but you do have somewhere to be. So I guess this is a time for, Jason can give some final thoughts. Yasi can give some final thoughts, and then Tim can close this out.
Yeah, cool. Yeah, thanks, Yasi, for coming on and sharing your story with us, and sharing some of your reflections with us. Always good to be here in the digital circle, learning and sharing a little bit about where we come from, So always good to be here, definitely with Armand and Tim. As always, gentlemen, it's a privilege and an honor. Continue to have these dialogues, these conversations, explore themes. So yeah, just once again appreciative for the opportunity. My sense, just like Armand just kind of finished up saying, I think if we can create personal action by way of thinking, passing on, being a noble being, it sounds like to me, being a conscious person. Let's pass along those qualities. Let's pass along the love and thoughtfulness and compassion. And I'm with that. So with that, just want to say I got love for you all, and until soon, be well and blessings.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me, all three of you. This was really fun, honestly, and I would think we could go on for hours and hours. And yeah, this was a great experience. I'm very honored to be here on your exciting podcast, and excited to also see what's in store for the podcast.
I appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you.
All right, Tim, do your thing, bro.
All right. Yeah. Likewise, lots of love, especially to have someone young. for viewers to listen to. It's always good to have a lot of these intergenerational different elements in a space of a conversation. It's really good to hear from different perspectives in different places. So definitely appreciate your presence. Armand, you sure? Nothing else to say? Nothing else to thoughts or appreciations?
No, I'm going to wrap it up once you're done with your thing.
All right. Ladies and gents, we're here at the end of another episode. Co-host Big Tim is going to present another ending statement that has profound and deep relevance to the topic at hand, our guest speaker, and listeners like you. Dear Yasi, it's humble to think that many of our global ills are not utterly incomprehensible, but simply due to a lack of scientific awareness. It's also a relief to know that a lot of our collective turmoil is simply spun out of our nature, not out of the inexplicable. But what's completely, truly hard to believe sometimes is just how seamlessly science complements and reinforces our good nature beliefs all around the world. I thank God for our capacity to grow closer together and closer to Him through science. Thank you for representing this eloquently. Thank you for your shared time with us and our listeners. God bless, and good safety and good health to you.
Beautiful.
All right. Thanks again for coming on, Yasi. It was a genuine pleasure having you on. But it's time to wrap this episode up and put a bow on it. So thank you to everyone who's listening from their house, cars, jobs, or wherever you may be. It doesn't matter because the point is 206 loves you. And until next time, peace.